Welcome, Jason, to the IoT For All Podcast. Thanks for being here this week.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, it's great to have you. We've done many episodes in the past with Core, but obviously you and I have not spoken before, so it's a pleasure to have you. And let's kick this off by having you give a quick introduction about yourself, the company, for anybody who might not be as familiar.
I'm Jason Dietrich. I'm our Chief Revenue Officer here at Core. I've been here just for about 18 months now. My role includes, leading our global sales and marketing teams, making sure that we're driving in the right markets, obviously, seeking growth for the organization, and also, making sure our brand is out there and relevant. So appreciate this opportunity. Prior to coming to Core, I spent the previous 25 years in the industrial automation and IoT space. So started kind of in the HMI, SCADA, MES world, eventually made my way into selling, IoT applications that supported inside the four walls and kind of the extended enterprise. And way back before that, process engineer. I'm a chemical engineer by background in the pharmaceutical world. And that's where I got my start in industrial automation.
Very cool. And just update us on kind of what Core's doing right now, like kind of what's your all's focus. I know, there's been the conversations we've had have evolved prior to kind of going public to where are you now?
Yeah, when I think about Core and when we try to represent to the world about Core is our North Star is connectivity. We want to be a provider globally to anybody who needs connectivity, regardless of your use case, regardless of where you are in the world, making sure that we give you the value prop of having high availability and making sure, again, regardless of where that device or application sits, that we're making sure you are having a device connected and having data flowing in the streams you expect. In addition to us being our connectivity North Star, we continue to have, a heavy play in terms of what we call IoT managed services, helping companies with the hard part of staging and kitting, reverse logistics, device management, full life cycle management on that equipment to make sure that it's always up to date, firmware is up to date, and so on. So we look at ourselves as kind of the one-stop shop. If you have an IoT solution that you're trying to deploy, we could be a trusted advisor to help you make that happen in the marketplace. And providing you both connectivity as well as a full set of services to make sure that you can scale accordingly to your business plan.
Tell me from your perspective, how you've kind of seen the IoT ecosystem change or evolve. I've been in it for about 8 years now. You've been in it longer than I have. Where has it kind of come from and how do you view things kind of in their current state?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I try to do in these situations is talk about what does the ecosystem consist of? Who are the players? When we think about an IoT solution being deployed, we kind of break it into three components. We say there's the device itself, whether that's a piece of hardware, that's a device that's been manufactured by an OEM or someone that's customized a piece of equipment to make sure that it's connectable. Then we think about the connectivity, making sure that device is now active and can be seen and the data flows accordingly. And then there's kind of the application portion of the IoT solution. And, I won't go into the breaking out of those three, kind of how we think of it in terms of percentage of work, but all three are key components to any solution. In those three, you obviously have, hardware and device manufacturers who are part of the ecosystem. You have a variety of carriers and MVNOs that can supply connectivity. And then you have a series of solution providers who've built applications specific to either a use case or vertical. In addition to them, then you have the rest of the players that feed the ecosystem. You have, VARs or distribution who help people procure and pick the right sets of capabilities. You have systems integrators and or consulting firms who are thinking about strategy, how to deploy, what's the revenue look like, what's the cost efficiency. Within that, I would say that, historically it was a fragmented market. None of those players kind of worked well together, through standardization over the series of the last few years. Through more options across all of those areas, we've seen that ecosystem coming together. But ultimately, when I think about the current state, there's still work to be done. I think that, from a perspective as the connectivity provider and someone who helps on the managed services side, we're trying to get closer to the hardware and device manufacturers to make sure as they're building their next generation, they're thinking about the newer technologies that are out there. We're on the forefront of standards. We try to be involved in, with all the regulatory agencies around device certification. So we look at ourselves as a company that can help pull that together. But to be fair, it's been fragmented over the last 10 to 12 years.
Yeah, I agree. I think fragmentation has been something we've talked about pretty much endlessly since we started this podcast many years ago. It's gotten better, but there's still a lot of pieces when it comes to the decision-making process, with companies to work with, just anything that has to do with deploying a solution. We've seen consolidation in the market. So we've seen, there's less choices, which I think in some ways is a good thing. Not less choices in terms of technology, but just how to decide between 200 different platforms or 200 different connectivity providers. So you're kind of seeing the ones that found how to address real business problems, kind of rise to the top and survive, which I think is great, and thrive even. But particularly speaking about fragmentation, can you talk about how you've seen that play a role in being a challenge for companies looking to deploy solutions, whether they're one of those pieces in bringing a solution to market, or it's a company looking to adopt a solution that might not, really have its hands in any one particular area like hardware connectivity or the application layer?
The first thing, it feels overwhelming for some companies in terms of how will they be able to do those three components that make the solution become available to the market. Where we think about what it takes to get live, we talk about build, deploy, manage, scale. So on the build side, you have to think about the device, the certification of that device, how to future-proof that, how am I going to update it, how am I going to make sure I have the ability to monitor it in real time and so on, right? Then there's the deploy side. How do I actually get that out into the field? Ultimately, how do I manage it once it's in the field? And then how do I scale that? So when I think about the challenges, the fragmented ecosystem kind of breaks down when you're trying to do those four things. Historically, we haven't had as great of an interaction, from a device to deploy. And then you get deploy to manage, which also, depending on who you're leveraging from a partner standpoint. And then ultimately, our goal was to help companies scale and make sure that they're ultimately getting, either the operational efficiencies or the revenue streams they anticipated. So I honestly think the biggest challenge is maybe lack of integration across those four areas historically. I've seen an improvement there. And I would just say that some people get scared or feel the challenge of, oh my God, I have to do these four things. And how do I do each one of these? And how do I think about what partners to use to do that? I think that's been the biggest obstacle.
We've seen a lot more companies, and I know Core kind of made this, I don't want to say full transition, but you kind of started to really focus on being able to provide solutions that solve real business problems. And I think as the industry evolved and got there, you started to really understand how all the different pieces of a solution fit together, because they were kind of put together in a way that was relatable to businesses to how to solve a business problem. In a good way, that's de-emphasized the importance of understanding all the details of technology, the technology that goes into a solution, which was a big barrier for companies at least when we got into the IoT space. Is, all these different technologies, what do they all do? How do they all work? It's overwhelming. I don't know where to begin. So we're just going to kind of sit on the sidelines for a while. But as that transition to saying, well, if we take this connectivity, we take cellular connectivity, put it with this device, with this application on top, here's what it actually does and solves for your particular industry or your particular business in a particular industry. And as people started to see the applications, I think that just kind of made a lot of these challenges become less of a daunting task or less of a barrier to entry for them.
I agree. I think the solution provider concept, the folks that are building the applications, sometimes the device itself and or the connectivity is an afterthought, but it's certainly, two of the three key pillars that make it happen. But, the development of solutions that are specific to a vertical or use case have really helped accelerate adoption. In the connected health space, you think about remote patient monitoring or, clinical trials in the field. That's evolved tremendously over the last few years. In the fleet vertical, which I would say is kind of the original kind of IoT use case, the number of solution providers there has actually gotten smaller, but the capabilities that they provide to an end user have grown, tremendously. So I think the more that the application stack becomes friendlier, easier to adopt, the connectivity becomes more seamless and kind of comes along for the ride. I mean, with device options and, a cleaner ecosystem on what you can buy there to make sure that your module or your device or your piece of hardware incorporates in that solution, it's gotten easier for people. But I do think it starts with solutions made and built for purpose for a specific use case.
Yeah, and a big piece of the solutions, obviously, for IoT is the devices and the solution itself just be connected, right? If it's a solution that's staying in one place that needs connectivity where it is, but if it's something like you talked about fleet, asset tracking, supply chain management in any capacity with IoT devices, it's going to be traveling around, moving around. So a lot of times what a company will do is that they'll want to investigate and understand a little bit better about what is the connectivity that's required for this solution in order to provide visibility at all times, or visibility at a very high percentage of times for me to be able to get the data when I need it. But I think to a lot of companies who are new to the space, when they go start doing that research to understand the different connectivity options or just the connectivity companies to work with, it's hard to tell the difference between what they all do and which one's the best one for my business. And given that you all have a extensive history in that space, you said as your North Star, how should people listening to this be thinking about not only choosing the best connectivity, but also just the right type of organization to work with when it comes to the connectivity piece of this whole puzzle?
Yeah, I think sometimes people oversimplify the connectivity piece, almost assuming it's just going to work. And for the most part, our job is to make that happen. And that's how we've, survived as an organization and grown to the level of devices we help, manage around the globe. What I like to talk to people about is, number one is, where do you plan on deploying? Is it going to be a local area where you can think about your redundancy requirements might be less? Is it a global deployment? How do you manage as that device particularly moves? Is it a fixed asset or something that does move? They might have different requirements there. I always talk to people when they think about their connectivity partner. Security has become, a big topic, not only obviously in the IoT world, globally across the many different applications and use cases around the globe. But we also talk a lot about, do you have the right security platform, in terms of, managing device level, understanding intrusion detection, having alerting, getting, alarms and notifications when things just don't look quite right. So it's, do you have a fixed asset or a movable asset? Are you looking to be global? What are your requirements for, latency, and what level of redundancy / availability do you need? Is there a battery consumption issue? Like, you have to think about all these things in terms of, as I'm going to deploy, if I have a fixed asset that sits in one location, my connectivity story might be simple. If I have an asset that travels and goes globally, now I have to think about cellular, I have to think about satellite, I have to think about how do I do store forward, things like that, you want to make sure that data, if there is a situation where you don't have connectivity, that you also can recover.
We've overcome a lot of the existing challenges for people to kind of just get on board with giving IoT a chance. And now we've kind of built this whole collection of new challenges that comes with the maturity of these technologies, with the adoption in different industries, with solutions traveling between different regions, all these different things. But one of the topics we talked about before is how important it is to make sure that the companies you work with understand the challenges prior to kind of getting involved with an IoT solution of any kind, whether it's something that's fixed, something that's moving around, just so that they understand the environment in which you're deploying, so that they can help solve those problems and kind of take those headaches away from you as much as possible.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think ultimately the most successful companies that we've seen deploy, and be able to truly manage and scale the way they anticipated from their original business plan, they had the right set of partners who helped guide them. You want a trusted advisor. You need more than one voice in the room. And we like to say we're the one-stop shop, but at the end of the day, we work with a lot of partners, and that's why the ecosystem is so important. But I talk to all of our customers and prospects. Look, at the end of the day, we would love to be the provider for you, but ultimately we want you to make sure that your implementation is successful. And that means it's kind of like, it's not a single company who can absolutely do everything you need. It's really, do you have a collection of partners who work well together, who can give you best practices and make sure you're making the right decisions early.
What is the future, or the IoT ecosystem of the future? What does that look like? Like, where are we going from your perspective?
I think the player types are going to remain the same. There's always going to be hardware device builders, there's always going to be connectivity players. There will be solution providers, and there will be people help you either procure, make decisions, and or implement those solutions. So I think the players remain the same. I think the integration of those players is already getting stronger. I think standards are helping, whether that's standards that are, impacting device selection, or standards that, are coming forward in terms of connectivity. Things that are also technology advancements are helping the ecosystem, quite frankly. So, my view is, kind of the future is bright, but we've been saying that for a long time. I joke with folks. When I started in the IoT space, selling application development platforms, it was the hype cycle at that time, right? There was a lot of POCs, a lot of pilots. And at that point, you want to talk about fragmentation. If you were someone trying to build an application, you didn't know who to go to for anything because of standards, certifications, regulatory requirements, companies learning how to work better together. I think we're seeing a massive improvement, and I think the future looks strong.
I think the more people understand and the more mature and trusted the technologies are, the better that's going to be. Also, just the more successes we start to see. Like, if a company is kind of waiting to see what, how IoT can be applied to their industry, they see their competitors or people that, they partner with find success with with IoT deployments, it's going to encourage more adoption, right?
It's a snowball effect. When companies see success and they see that this is actually doable, and oh, by the way, to your point, my competitor is doing it. They figured out how to do it. Some people don't want to be first movers. They don't want to be first in the market. There are companies who like to be that company. What we find, there's more of a follower mentality in this, but success certainly drives additional adoption.
Yeah, and I think the same thing could be said with use cases too. Like obviously, you talked about fleet. Asset tracking is kind of one of the things that really led the way when we got into it. That was the big. Everyone just wanted to put a device on an asset and track its location. But obviously, we've expanded because of the capabilities of across hardware connectivity and software and so forth to make more use cases viable. For the longest time, indoor asset tracking was the kind of holy grail. If you could do that, like that was a big thing, right? And now it's become more table stakes to be able to accomplish that. There's still some challenges involved, but technology has matured to get us to a point where that's more realistic for companies to be able to do. So it's kind of like that as well. And I think seeing the successes, but also just the maturity of the technology, being able to prove out these use cases, the more we're able to do that, the more easy it is for people to adopt.
We're using a term high value asset monitoring now because we're seeing people really focus on kind of bigger equipment, expensive equipment. Ultimately, downtime is costly. Certainly, supply chain, logistics, obviously retail, with all the applications now in a retail store, whether it's smart vending, ATMs, point of sale. Well, it truly is the case now where the snowball effect has been achieved, and now it's a matter of, are you the right partner to help that new company do what they want to do in the market?
I think a big piece to whether you're able to do that and whether a company sees success is the ROI that the solution delivers. So you talked about, high value assets. And for a lot of these solutions, it has to make economic sense for a company to spend the money to build a solution, to track the assets. They have to be worth something enough to kind of offset, basically to offset the cost to see value there. But a lot of times there's companies that we've spoken with and seen that are trying to track maybe not the most expensive assets, and the solutions aren't viable yet for them. Like from an economic standpoint, it just doesn't make sense to the bottom line. It's that the cost doesn't outweigh the benefit just yet. It's great data and great access to kind of information they didn't have, but the economics just aren't there to make it make sense. And I think as that continues to kind of become possible, that's going to be just opening up the door for even more use cases right now that people are getting into pilots, but just not able to kind of get anywhere beyond that because of the economics.
When they decide not to move forward, it's because the economics don't work, right? There has to be return, as you mentioned. I would say that there are costs coming down that are making it more viable for some of those use cases. I still go back to my inside the four walls thoughts as an industrial automation /M2M/IoT seller, which is at the end of the day, are we being more efficient? Therefore, we're saving dollars for our organization by deploying something. Are we increasing our productivity or our people and or those assets? The one that I found the most viable for many companies is they're actually monetizing it with new revenue streams. You're no longer selling a piece of equipment, you're selling a service for that equipment to be available.
Yeah, I think that's really been an interesting and great point you brought up. Is it's not just about access to data or being able to do things better internally, but there is this whole other level or layer to it. When possible, it doesn't always fit. Is generating new revenue. So it's not always about just being more efficient or being able to kind of cut down costs and do things in a better way. There's also ways to generate new revenue. And I think that's something that as people really understand, it just unlocks the potential for what these solutions can do even more when applicable.
Yeah, I've seen some of the best deployments in my career, at Core and before. It's companies that truly identified a way to monetize the service associated with it. And they said, look, we're going to sell you a piece of equipment that is expensive, but we're going to manage it for you. We're going to monitor it for you. We're going to tell you when it needs maintenance. We're going to let you know that something's about to happen on that piece of equipment, and we're going to remotely monitor it for you. But we're going to charge you, there's a cost associated with that. But ultimately, so it's a new revenue stream, but ultimately the end customer wins there because they're not having downtime. Their cost may feel like it's higher by paying for level service, but at the end of the day, when they look at their real cost to using that equipment, they're also saving dollars. And that's why the value prop works for both parties.
So I know you all are involved with a lot of IoT for Good initiatives. I'm curious to have you talk more about what that means. And kind of, I think there's people out there that when you think about using IoT for Good, obviously, most of the things we've talked about so far are good things. But when we're talking about this, quote unquote, IoT for Good, what does that exactly mean? Can you give us some examples?
Obviously, we work with a lot of companies around the globe on a variety of use cases, but the ones that I think that we feel are the most impactful are doing good for the world, good for people, for the community. So IoT for good to us means, are we helping companies, with sustainability initiatives? Are we doing projects that are environmentally friendly? Are we lowering our carbon footprint? Are we, helping that patient in a home be better serviced from their healthcare provider? So IoT for good is something we're proud of. I know with my team specifically and the broader core team, when we're working on projects like that, it just feels different than maybe some projects that we know are good for business. But also say that what IoT for good is, it's good for all the things I said, but it's also good for business, because we find our investors, companies who work with us as partners, they actually value the fact that we're working on projects that do those things for the community, for people, for the world, et cetera. So we find it's not only good for communities, it's also, it's good for business.
Yeah, that would be a question, was like, what are the benefits of focusing on that? Because a lot of times people view those types of initiatives as seem great, right? They're great for society, but from a business perspective, it just might not always make sense economically. But for an organization like Core, you potentially have the luxury of being able to take on those projects. Is there money in that? Being able to do that. And I guess maybe you could talk me through kind of how you kind of evaluate that, because you've already mentioned there's obviously benefits from the partners you work with, investors, just that helps the business. But just purely economically, is that something that other companies listening to this should consider taking on and look into? Or is it more of, depending on the stage of your business, kind of make it more viable for you or not?
Most of the IoT use cases we've talked about in reality are good for the things I mentioned. So I would say that anybody in our world, who's any part of that ecosystem, is probably already working on projects that are kind of in the bucket of IoT for good. I would say the business benefits for us, look, we always look at every project just like customers do and say, is there a return on investment from my perspective? We look at it and say, what's the financial viability for us to undertake it? And we have taken at times, concessions on deals to make sure that we are progressing the IoT for good story. But at the end of the day, both companies can win. If we're doing a project that's lowering costs, from or lowering their operational costs associated with managing their reporting on environmental health and safety initiatives and sustainability initiatives. Ultimately, the ROI is there for them, and we can still make a profit doing it, but yet doing something good. So we evaluate all those on a case by case basis. But I would say we lean in heavily into driving projects that ultimately fit into that bucket.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's interesting to think about is some of these projects that I'm sure you're involved in will teach you all a lot and help you refine certain applications and different technologies and better understand how they can be used in these environments, which then can be taken and packaged up and sold it to other businesses and organizations that might be in a similar or related industry. And you'd be able to execute that in a more efficient way because of the learnings for maybe some of these bigger projects that are a little bit different, more focused on kind of the overall impact it has on the environment or has in society or in the community versus purely just revenue based. So I think there's a lot of takeaways from being able to get involved in those types of projects that can just carry business value beyond anything that you might be thinking about.
Every project that we do, at some point you learn something. I would say that some of the larger projects that fall into this bucket, any challenges we face as far as doing that deployment or helping with those partners and or customers, we learn and we can leverage that. The connected health space, which is one we're very proud of. When it comes to the areas that we focus on, they're complex solutions in the end. You're working with, again, device connectivity, but the end provider of that solution, there's a lot of things that we learn in that process that every project we do in the connected health space, we feel is IoT for good. And we learn a lot that we can leverage in other use cases, sir.
So where's Core kind of going? What should we be looking out for? What's anything on the agenda before the end of the year into next year that we should kind of be, excited for?
Yeah, I think for us, we feel like we're in a really good spot as an organization. The forward-looking view of Core, we feel good about where we are in terms of kind of how we've grown our connection base. And obviously, with growing our connection base typically means, the financial results can follow. We obviously, we've had some acquisitions over the years that you're well aware of. So we've been doing a lot of work in terms of, the integration of those technologies and building what we consider to be the best-in-class connectivity platform in the world. So more to come on that as we turn the corner into 2025, when we start really rolling that out into the world. But it's taking the best of what we had with SuperSIM through the Twilio IoT acquisition, as well as the best of OmniSIM and our Connectivity Pro, platform. We see that kind of coming together in a way that we get the best of all and provide a better level of service to our customers. And, the last thing I'd say is, we are very focused on, I would say the key word to takeaway is focus. We're getting very focused on the area. We know we can help companies. We have repeatable win capability. We have references where we know customers have, had a return on investment. And how do we help customers just do it faster? That's ultimately what we're trying to do every day.
Appreciate you taking the time. For our audience who wants to learn more about Core, or maybe just follow up with you, touch base in any capacity, what's the best way they can do any of that?
Yeah, certainly our website is always available, for the content and the messages that we have in the marketplace. My information is listed on the website as one of the executives in the organization. You can certainly reach out to me directly. My email address is on there. We also have the normal ways to contact us, through the website, filling out information, et cetera. But I really appreciate the time.
Great to have you on, and look forward to hopefully talking again in the future.
Great. Well, thank you again.